Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're focusing on a crisis that has, really captured global attention, but at the same time remains tragically opaque.
Almost intentionally so.
Exactly. Intentionally dark. We're talking about the massive nationwide uprising that has gripped Iran since late December 2025. And this isn't just another political skirmish.
No, not at all.
It feels fundamentally different. This is a social and economic breaking point for an entire nation. The crisis feels, almost existential. It really demands some clarity.
And that's really where we have to start. The spark, the immediate trigger for this explosion of anger wasn't a political decree. It wasn't some new law.
Right.
It was pure, raw economic collapse that finally, pushed people over the edge. We've seen financial distress in Iran before, many times, but this was a different beast entirely.
How so? What made this one the breaking point?
It was the scale and the speed of it. The Iranian rial suffered a catastrophic, just a truly historic plunge. It dropped to an astronomical 1.42 million per US dollar.
1.42 million. That's a number that's hard to even wrap your head around.
It's almost abstract, isn't it? But it's not just a financial statistic. For the people on the ground, that number is a symbol of total economic despair. It's the sound of the middle class, and what was left of it just evaporating.
And their survival along with it.
Their survival, their savings, their future. And that financial trigger, that number, it instantly escalated the demands on the street.
So it moved beyond just, hey, fix the economy.
Immediately. It moved the conversation way beyond simple market fixes or, slight monetary adjustments. It catalyzed these fundamental calls for political reform, for basic human dignity, for justice.
Because when people can't afford bread, the argument shifts from budgeting to the legitimacy of the government itself.
Precisely. And the scale of this reaction is why this deep dive is so critical. For you, the listener, the first thing to grasp is just the sheer magnitude of this unrest. This isn't isolated to Tehran's, intellectual elite or a few regional capitals.
Yeah.
Protests have spread, and spread rapidly, to over 180 cities.
108.
Across all 31 provinces of Iran, every single one. That level of nationwide coordination and participation is, it's astonishing.
And it must be terrifying for the regime.
It signals that this moment is truly existential for them. It's like a societal fever breaking across the entire country all at once.
And that scale, that very scope, brings us right to the core challenge of our analysis today, doesn't it?
It really does.
Because the protests are so vast and the crackdown has been so swift and so lethal. Our source material, all the articles, the human rights reports, the opposition claims, they present wildly conflicting casualty figures.
Wildly.
And this isn't just messy reporting.
This is by design. It's the direct result of heavy government censorship and the intentional production of misinformation. The numbers themselves have become a battlefield.
So what's our mission today? How do we navigate this?
Well, our mission is complex. First, we have to unpack these contested numbers. We need to explore why the verified minimums from, say, human rights groups differ so wildly from the maximums claimed by opposition groups.
Okay.
Then we have to trace the brutal day-by-day timeline of the state's repression, from December 28th right through to January 12th. We need to understand the sequence of the violence, how it escalated.
And critically, we have to reveal the dual nature of this battleground. We'll look at how the government is using these analog, very physical tactics.
The motorbike squad.
The deadly mobile motorbike squads designed to sow chaos and fear. And at the same time, they're using these incredibly sophisticated digital tools.
The digital straitjacket.
Nationwide internet blackouts, all designed to crush dissent and, maybe more importantly, to hide the evidence.
And on the flip side of that, we have to examine how citizens are fighting back, how they're leveraging these technological lifelines, specifically Starlink, to try and pierce that digital veil.
So the battle is happening in the streets and in the skies simultaneously.
It is. And it's really a defining moment for understanding how authoritarian control, economic desperation, and digital resistance all intersect in the 21st century.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Let's start with that enormous human cost, but maybe let's go back for a second to that economic trigger. The 1.42 million rial to the dollar. What does that actually mean for an average family in, say, Isfahan?
That's the right question.
Yeah.
We have to move beyond the currency exchange rate as an abstract thing. This level of hyper-devaluation meant that the ability of an average Iranian family to get basic necessities, it vanished.
Oh,
overnight.
because so much is imported.
Exactly. Iran is heavily reliant on imports, especially for key staples. We're talking about wheat, rice, essential medications, even spare parts for their aging infrastructure, for the power grid, for water treatment plants.
So the cost of those goods just shot through the roof.
Immediately. It's hyperinflation that's targeted squarely at human survival. Food prices, medicine prices, they became astronomical. One source noted, for example, that common life-saving medications, things imported from Europe or India, they became completely unobtainable for huge segments of the population.
So if you have a chronic condition, if you need cancer drugs.
You're out of luck. When a pharmacist in Tehran tells a reporter they can't restock basic chemotherapy drugs because the currency needed to buy them internationally has just, vaporized, the crisis stops being about financial policy.
It becomes a matter of life and death.
For millions.
Yeah.
And that despair over sheer survival, that's what fueled the protests. It's what made those initial participants, the market traders, the working poor, unwilling to just go home and the police showed up with batons. They had nothing left to lose.
And when you look at the raw casualty data that came out of that desperation, it becomes immediately clear that getting a straight answer on the death toll is, well, it's next to impossible.
It is. The source material is unanimous on this point. Reporting is exceptionally difficult. You have the heavy censorship, the severely limited media access for foreign journalists, and this overwhelming government surveillance apparatus.
It creates a deliberate fog of war.
It's designed to hide the scale of the state's lethal force. This challenge, it forces us to rely on independent monitors who have, over years, established networks and rigorous, often forensically verifiable methods of counting.
Their figures are, by necessity, going to be conservative then.
They have to be. But they provide the only factual foundation we have for accountability. So we need to define who these groups are and why their specific numbers matter so much.
Okay, so let's walk through the key players in this grim task of documentation. Where do we start? What's the foundational benchmark?
The most widely cited non-governmental source we have, one you'll see quoted most often, is the U.S.-based Human Rights Activists News Agency, or HRANA.
HRANA, okay. What makes them the go-to source?
Well, HRANA is critical because it works through these established networks of activists and journalists who are inside Iran.
They have people on the ground.
People on the ground taking immense risks, and they dedicate enormous effort to verifying names, locations, and the specific methods of death. They cross-reference reports. They try to get confirmation from family members. It's painstaking, dangerous work. But it provides the most consistent baseline we have.
So what are their baseline figures? What's the number they're putting out?
As of January 11, 2026, HRANA reported that at least 490 protesters have been killed by security forces.
190.
And that figure is coupled with a truly shocking number of over 10,600 arrests.
Wow. Over 10,000 arrests.
That mass detention figure, it's a clear sign that the regime isn't just killing dissenters in the moment. They're trying to preemptively remove any potential future threat from society. It's a purge.
And you said HRANA had a slightly different count as well.
Yes, it's important to note that. They themselves had a slightly variant subsequent count, which placed the total fatalities at 538.
Okay, so a range.
A tight range. Let's say between 490 and 538. That is the critical verified baseline for protester deaths in this wave of unrest.
Those numbers are staggering, and they represent lives that have been verified by name, date, and location wherever possible.
That's the key.
Which brings us to what you might call the more conservative documentation, reports that are specifically designed for future legal accountability.
Exactly. These are the groups whose figures might seem lower at first glance, but they are backed by meticulous, evidence-based details, the kind of detail you would need to bring a case before, say, the International Criminal Court.
So this is about building a legal case for crimes against humanity.
That's the ultimate goal of this kind of documentation. And we see that deliberate, meticulous approach in the reporting from organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch.
What were their initial findings?
Their initial documented count was narrower. It focused on the most intense initial period of violence. They confirmed at least 28 killings that occurred specifically between December 31st, 2025 and January 3rd, 2026.
28 seems low compared to nearly 500. Why the focus on that narrow window?
Because that's the window where they could gather the most rock-solid, verifiable evidence before the information blackout really took hold. And crucially, their reporting focuses very heavily on the method of the killing.
Why is the method so important?
Because the method determines intent. It's the key to proving a systematic policy. They emphasize the unlawful, deliberate use of firearms and metal pellets by security forces.
Okay, firearms are obviously lethal, but metal pellets, that sounds like something for riot control. It sounds less lethal.
And that's the deceptive terminology the state wants you to hear. But the reality, as documented by Amnesty, is that these metal pellets are systematically used by Iranian security forces at very close range, often fired from shotguns.
And at close range.
They cause devastating lethal injuries. They rip apart organs, they shred flesh. This isn't accidental crowd control gone wrong. It's clear evidence of a systematic lethal suppression strategy. It's a strategy aimed at ending the descent by force of arms.
So even that seemingly lower number, 28, is actually a rock-solid confirmation of a state policy of lethal force.
Absolutely. It's the legal cornerstone. Now let's look at another essential independent monitor, the Norway-based Iran Human Rights, or IHRNGO.
Okay.
IHRNGO often focuses on gathering family testimonies and detailed records. The reports tend to personalize the tragedy in a really profound human way.
Yeah.
They initially reported at least 51 protesters killed.
And what was the key detail in their report?
The most tragic detail, and the one they highlighted, was that 9 children were among those initial victims.
9 children.
The inclusion of children immediately underscores the indiscriminate nature of the repression.
It means they were just firing into crowds.
Firing into crowds without any attempt to discern age or intent or threat level. And IHRNGO's figures, because they reflect the grim reality on the ground, they rose very quickly. By January 12, they updated their protester death count to a staggering 648.
So from 51 to 648 in a matter of days.
Yes. And what's important here for you, the listener, is to see the consistent daily upward trajectory of all these credible, independently verified figures. You have HRNet at 490 to 538 and IHRNG at 648. They all reveal this undeniable pattern of escalating state violence against its own citizens.
Including minors.
Including minors. These aren't just statistics. They're proof of a crime being committed under the cover of censorship.
Okay, so that's the verified, documented side of the equation. Now we have to look at the other end of the scale, the opposition's perspective.
This is where the numbers diverge, as you said, wildly. And it really underscores the extreme political weight of the unrest and the, frankly, desperate attempt by the opposition to galvanize some kind of global response.
Who is the main source for these higher numbers?
The most prominent high-end claims come from the People's Mojahedin Organization of Iran, which is better known as the PMOI, or MEK.
Now, for context, this is an exiled group, right? And they're often highly controversial.
Very controversial. Their primary function in this context is political mobilization. They are trying to shape international policy, and they claim over 3,000 deaths as of January 11.
3,000?
3,000. And other, less verified estimates that were circulating in those circles went as high as 6,000 or more.
That is a 6-fold difference from the highest independent monitor figure. It's a massive gap that requires some clear analysis. Are they just inflating the numbers, or does the scale of the information blackout mean the true number could actually be closer to their claims?
It's probably a bit of both, but we have to treat the figures differently. The sheer scale of the crisis and the fact that there was this total information blackout, it does give credence to the idea that the true death toll is much, much higher than the verified minimums.
So the 648 is what can be proven, not necessarily what happened.
Exactly. It's the floor, not the ceiling. However, these PMOI figures, the 3,000 plus, they are almost certainly inflated for maximum political impact.
What's the strategic purpose of that?
Well, they serve a political function. They're trying to mobilize international support to draw media attention away from other world events and to pressure international bodies like the UN Security Council to act.
So it's political communication aimed at the West.
Primarily. But even if they are unverified and likely inflated, their high-end estimates do reflect the political perception of a mass killing on the ground. They reflect the desperate atmosphere.
So we have these two poles. On one side, you have the meticulous, verifiable figures from human rights organizations, which are built for legal accountability.
Right.
And on the other, you have the politically charged figures from the opposition, which are built for political mobilization.
A perfect summary. And then on the complete opposite side of both of those, you have the state's own narrative.
Which is built entirely to justify the crackdown.
100%. We look at state-affiliated media, outlets like the Tasnim news agency. Their focus is almost entirely on portraying the protesters as rioters, as foreign agents, as terrorists. And they emphasize the losses among their own forces.
What numbers are they putting out?
They claim the death of somewhere between 109 and 114 security personnel.
And what about civilian deaths?
They provide little to no verifiable civilian casualty figures. Or if they do, they're minimal, easily dismissed numbers. A few rioters were unfortunately killed in the crossfire. It's an attempt to control the narrative completely.
Okay, so when we see the government reporting such high numbers for their own losses, 109 to 114, is that number credible? And what does it tell us about the nature of the challenge they're facing?
It tells us this uprising is far more serious, far more violent than previous waves of protest. While the state's civilian death counts are, inherently unreliable and designed to mislead, they're reporting on their own security losses. It's substantial.
Even if it's also inflated for propaganda.
Even then, let's look at the independent count. HRNO, for instance, reported 48 security force casualties.
48.
Even at that conservative independent count, that is the highest number of security deaths in any recent Iranian protest wave. Higher than 2022, higher than 2019.
So 48 security deaths confirmed by an independent monitor versus somewhere between 490 and 648 confirmed civilian deaths. That disparity is stark.
It's incredibly stark. Yet the government focuses only on its own losses.
Why? What's the strategy?
The state narrative must focus on their own losses. They amplify the specific tragic details. 30 security personnel killed in Esfahan, another 9 in Gazvin. They're using these deaths to justify the severity of the crackdown.
To portray their forces as being under siege.
Exactly, acting defensively against a violent, foreign-backed insurrection. It aligns perfectly with their historical patterns of undercounting civilian deaths while highlighting security losses to legitimize these massive lethal security operations. It attempts to flip the script. The state is the victim, and the protesters are the aggressors.
It's a very powerful propaganda tool.
Very.
So if we synthesize all these figures, we're left with this enormous tragic spread from Amnesty's verified minimum of 28, all the way up to HRN's 538, IHRNGO's 648, and then the PMOI's 3000. It paints a picture of massive violence happening under a veil of total information control.
But the common thread is clear, isn't it? Lethal force was deployed systematically from day one. The precise final number may remain obscured forever, but the conclusion for you, the listener, is inescapable. The regime sanctioned mass killing.
Regardless of whether the final number is 490 or 3,000.
Right. Each number represents a life cut short in a struggle for dignity, justice, and simple economic survival. The fact that the numbers are so contested is in itself a testament to the regime's successful strategy of sowing doubt and masking state terror.
Which makes accountability extremely difficult.
Almost impossible without a major political shift.
That analysis really clarifies not just the numbers, but the political and strategic purpose behind why those numbers are so different. The information war really does begin and end with the casualty data.
It does.
Okay, let's move past the final figures for a moment and establish the day-by-day timeline. How did this escalate so quickly from a market protest to a massive civil uprising? So we're going to walk through this chronology to really understand the sheer speed of this. The speed at which localized economic protests transformed into a full-scale civil uprising, and, crucially, how quickly the state shifted its tactics.
From tear gas and arrests to widespread organized lethal force, it's a rapid, terrifying escalation that defines this 15-day period we're examining.
So where's the clock start?
The clock starts ticking on December 28th, 2025 in Tehran. This is the genesis moment. It's rooted purely in that economic despair we were talking about. Protests erupt, specifically in Tehran's major markets. The bazaar, fueled by the radial's collapse to that historic low.
And at this stage, it's just disorganized anger.
It's disorganized anger. It's traders, shopkeepers, ordinary people. And crucially, in these first 48 hours, there were no fatalities reported. The police were containing, not executing. They were trying to manage it.
And over the next couple of days, December 29th and 30th?
The protest movement gains traction. It starts to spread beyond the markets, hitting university campuses and other major cities. The initial police response is immediate, but it's still relatively non-lethal.
So tear gas.
Primarily tear gas in Tehran to disperse the crowds, coupled with a wave of arrests. But still, no confirmed deaths in this initial containment phase. The regime is still hoping this will just burn itself out.
But it doesn't, and that brings us to December 31st. This is the turning point.
This is the critical shift. The moment the regime seems to have decided that containment was failing and lethal force was now required. This is when the violence truly begins.
Where did it start?
In Fasa, a city in Fars province. The sources report that the protests there turned overtly violent. Demonstrators injure police, and critically, they storm the governor's office.
A direct challenge to state authority.
An open physical challenge to the state's authority. And the state's response is immediate retaliation. This specific escalation marks the starting point of that concentrated lethal wave of repression that Amnesty International documented.
The 28 killings.
The 28 documented killings over just 4 days across 13 cities. This isn't just Fasa anymore. It's spreading across 8 provinces, including Loristan, Ilam, and Esfahan. The methods of death are firearms, metal pellets, and severe beatings. The violence had become widespread and lethal.
And by New Year's Day, January 1st, 2026, we see the first confirmed fatalities recorded across multiple locations.
Yes, this confirms that the strategic shift to lethal force is now nationwide. The sources report at least 7 total fatalities on this day alone.
Do we where?
We know of 3 in Asna and Loristan province and others in Bakhtiari and Isfahan provinces. And this also includes the death of 1 Basij volunteer.
Which the state would have immediately used for propaganda purposes.
Immediately. To paint the protesters as violent killers. But here we have to focus on the human tragedy that Amnesty International specifically documented. They provided names for at least 8 of the deaths in Loristan during this early phase.
And this includes a minor.
Yes. The horrifying, detailed tragedy of 16-year-old Taha Safari in Loristan. This single day established the brutal reality. The state was willing to use live rounds on its citizens, and children were among the earliest victims. That detail, the killing of a minor, it tells you everything you need to know about the indiscriminate nature of the repression.
So January 2nd seems to be a day of continued spreading and simmering violence. But the real action is happening behind the scenes, isn't it? The political temperature is rising exponentially within the corridors of power.
Absolutely. And that leads to the formalized zero-tolerance mandate on January 3rd.
This is the definitive strategic shift. This is where lethal force becomes official policy.
It is. On January 3rd, you have the Supreme Leader, Khamenei, giving a speech where he explicitly calls to put rioters in their place.
A phrase which is essentially a green light.
It's a green light for extreme force. And that's followed by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, declaring a policy of zero tolerance. After that, the violence escalates dramatically.
How dramatic was that escalation on that single day?
We see at least 11 protesters killed in a single 24-hour period. And this wasn't scattered violence anymore. This was concentrated, targeted repression in specific regional hotspots. The sources provide chilling detail on the locations and even the names of the victims, which emphasizes the systematic nature of the killing.
Give us some of those tragic specifics to illustrate the calculated nature of this.
Sure. Take the specific instance in Malakshahi, a town in Elam province, which is cited in the sources. 5 people were killed there in one day. We have their names. Reza Azimzadeh, Latif Karimi, Mehdi Mamipur, Faiz Aga Mohammadi, and Mohammad Reza Karami.
Just listing the names makes it so much more real than the numbers.
It does. And another 3 were killed in Jafarabad, in Kermanshah. This is systematic violence, planned and executed. This wave of force pushes the cumulative death toll to at least 15 protesters by the end of the day, with arrests now surpassing 580.
And yet the protests are still expanding.
Incredibly, yes, to over 170 locations across 25 provinces. The state's calculus is clear. Respond to the geographical expansion of the protest with intensified lethal force. But it's not working. It's fanning the flames.
So the next few days, January 4th and 5th, the violence continues to mount. By January 6th, what does the scoreboard look like?
By January 6th, the cumulative death toll hits 36. That's 34 protesters and 2 security forces. And the demonstrations are now reported in an astonishing 280-plus locations across 27 provinces. The uprising is reaching its maximum breadth.
Which forces the state to take even more drastic measures.
And then comes the strategic move that attempts to blindfold the world and mask the ongoing violence, the digital shutdown. On January 8th, IHRNGO reports the death toll has hit at least 45 killed, including 8 children.
8 children.
And simultaneously, the nationwide internet blackout begins. This move immediately complicates all reporting and verification. It acts as a massive shield for the security forces on the ground.
That timing is crucial, isn't it? The blackout is initiated at a moment of peak violence and rising child fatalities.
It strongly suggests the blackout was premeditated to cover up evidence of mass violence. It was a calculated operational decision.
And over the next 24 hours,
January 8th and 9th, you have the exiled crown prince calling for overnight protests, which are immediately met with these severe government-imposed internet and phone blocks. But despite this attempt at total silence, the cumulative death toll reaches 62, with over 2,300 detainees now confirmed by independent monitors.
the number of arrests just keeps skyrocketing. It's a mass dragnet operation.
It is. And this brings us to the peak of the crackdown on January 10th.
What happened during this intense 48-hour period?
This is the period of the greatest information darkness. Opposition sources, the PMOI, begin claiming over 2,000 deaths occurred during this 48-hour period of intense, unmonitored repression.
2,002 days.
Now, at that specific time, the number of verified names totaled only 57 protesters. But that massive disparity, 2,000 claimed versus 57 verified, it highlights the sheer chaos and, crucially, the success of the blackout in preventing comprehensive real-time documentation. It's the height of the information war.
So by January 11th, the HRNA figures we discussed earlier, they get formalized.
Yes, the 538 total killed 490 protesters, 48 security forces. And those security force casualties are noted as the highest in any recent protest wave, which again emphasizes the seriousness of the challenge the state is facing.
And there's a new threat emerging.
Yes. Warnings of mass executions against the detained protesters are already beginning to emerge. This shows the legal machinery is now being weaponized alongside physical force to ensure long-term terror.
And the final status on January 12th, the end of our timeline.
On January 12th, IHR-NGO updates their numbers, pushing the verifiable protester deaths to 648. The situation is incredibly fluid, clashes are ongoing, and the sources repeatedly warn that the death toll is expected to rise. The timeline clearly illustrates a government strategy that moved from initial containment to systematic lethal force and climaxed with a total information lockdown designed to hide the atrocities.
The speed of that escalation, from an economic protest to documented mass killing in 6 days, followed by a digital blackout. It's profoundly chilling. And it gives us the perfect transition into the details of that total information lockdown. This blackout isn't just an inconvenience, it's a strategic weapon. So let's shift now, from the violence on the physical streets to the war being waged in the digital realm. Why is the internet so fundamentally critical to the regime's strategy? Why is it the first and most necessary thing they have to cut when they're facing this level of unrest?
Well, because at the end of the day, control over the flow of information is control over the narrative. And without coordination, resistance is fragmented, it's localized, it's manageable. Iran has a long and, frankly, troubling history of weaponizing internet blackouts during periods of civil unrest.
So this isn't a new playbook.
Not at all. The sources repeatedly emphasize this. It's a perfected tool of repression, practiced and refined over years. It's the digital straitjacket they can throw over the entire country.
Let's delve deeper into that historical context. What is the most chilling precedent that informs the strategy they used in January 2026?
The most chilling one, the one that every human rights monitor cited in our sources references, is the November 2019 blackout.
I remember this. It was shocking at the time.
It was. That shutdown was a full national service cut that lasted an astonishing 144 hours.
6 straight days?
6 straight days of digital darkness. And crucially, that blackout served as the perfect cover. It masked the killing of an estimated 1,500 protesters.
1,500.
The state learned a devastating lesson then. Use the digital darkness to perpetrate mass violence without any global scrutiny. And we saw similar shutdowns deployed, maybe slightly less severe, during the 2022 Women Life Freedom Uprising. The pattern is established, it's tested, and it's reliable for them. Silence the streets by silencing the connections.
Okay, so let's detail the evolution of the 2026 blackout, because it wasn't an instantaneous flip of a switch, was it? It was more methodical.
It was a methodical tightening of that digital straitjacket. The process began with minor disruptions between December 28th and 31st. As the protests erupted in Tehran's markets and on the campuses, authorities implemented sporadic throttling.
Throttling. Can you explain what that means in practice?
Throttling means intentionally slowing down connections. It makes it incredible. The two main ones, they're the standard communication tools for millions of Iranians. And to do this, they utilize sophisticated techniques like deep packet inspection, DPI.
Which lets them look inside the data traffic.
It lets them identify and filter encrypted traffic, trying to find and block the virtual private networks, the VPNs, that protesters were using to bypass the local filters.
So the regime was already playing this cat-and-mouse game, using sophisticated filtering and throttling for a full week before the total cut.
Precisely. They were tightening the screws. Protesters tried to pivot to other VPNs, to proxies, to alternative messaging apps, but real-time mass coordination was being increasingly hindered. And remember, this is the period that saw the documentation of those first 28 killings. The partial blackouts were already beginning to obscure casualty details from the very start.
Setting the stage for the cover-up.
Yes, and the final critical step in this digital shutdown came on January 8th, the same day the highest verified number of child deaths were reported.
The timing, again, is just... it's not a coincidence.
No. Around 8:30 a.m. local time on January 8th, the government pulled the plug, almost entirely. This was a nationwide infrastructure shutdown. Connectivity plummeted to near zero across the entire country.
And this affected everything.
Fixed broadband, mobile services, everything simultaneously. Major urban centers, Tehran, Isfahan, Shiraz, Kermanshah, they lost both internet and often basic phone connectivity as well.
What does a group like NetBlocks, which monitors global connectivity, what did they say about this?
NetBlocks provided the data that confirmed the scale. They're the independent watchdog for this sort of thing. They described the move as a deliberate, massive infrastructure action designed to, and I'm quoting here, hinder the public's right to communicate at a critical moment.
And the immediate result?
The immediate result was that the flow of video evidence, the stuff that's critical for accountability, it just dried up. It sharply decreased, right as the physical crackdown was reaching its deadly peak. It confirms the link between digital darkness and mass violence.
And as of January 12th, 4 days later, the situation was still dire.
It was. The blackout had exceeded 100 hours, more than 4 full days, with connectivity remaining at effectively zero across the country. That's confirmed by both NetBlocks and Cloudflare data. The deliberate isolation of 80 million people was complete. We're looking at a state that views mass digital silence as an operational necessity for its own survival.
So let's synthesize the government's strategic purpose here. It's clearly not just about preventing a flash mob from organizing.
No, it's much deeper. It's about systemic survival and avoiding accountability. We can identify 4 primary strategic reasons for these blackouts.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first, and the most obvious, is to prevent coordination. To stop protesters from using social media and messaging apps to organize, which fragments the uprising into these isolated, manageable pockets of violence that can be crushed one by one.
And the second?
The second, and this is the one most critical to accountability, is to block evidence of abuses. To stop the videos and photos of lethal force from getting out, ensuring that the outside world and any future courts have no verifiable documentation of their crimes.
And the third strategic reason goes back to that narrative control we discussed earlier.
It does. They use the darkness to obscure the true casualty figures. This enables them to control their official narrative while human rights organizations are struggling to keep up. If you prevent confirmation, you create doubt. And doubt slows down any international response.
The fog of war we talked about.
They create it intentionally. And fourth, and this is politically necessary for them, they use the resulting chaos and the lack of verifiable information to shift blame to foreign interference.
Foreign enemy trope.
Exactly. Figures like President Masoud Pezeshkian explicitly issued warnings of retaliation against the United States, using the internal chaos to frame the uprising not as a domestic crisis caused by their own economic failure, but as an externally orchestrated plot designed to destabilize the nation.
We also have to consider the vast consequences of this. It goes far beyond just the protests themselves. It impacts the daily lives and the economy of the entire nation.
The impact is severe, and it touches every part of life. It reinforces the very economic despair that started this whole thing. Human rights organizations like Amnesty have explicitly called the blackout a tool of human rights violation, describing it as weaponized to hide crimes.
Because it prevents people from getting help.
It prevents citizens from accessing emergency services, medical help, contacting family members, and it enables this unchecked violence by the security forces. Economically, it causes severe disruption to daily life, to business operations, to global communications. It's effectively punishing the entire populace.
A form of collective punishment.
Absolutely. Yet, despite this massive digital restriction, the sources all emphasize the incredible resilience of the population.
That's the central, inspiring part of this narrative.
It is. Despite facing this total digital straitjacket, the throttling, the DPI, the app blocks, and then the total blackout, the protests continued. They even spread to all 31 provinces. It proves that no blackout, no matter how draconian or technically sophisticated, can entirely silence a society that is determined to assert its fundamental rights.
The continued street activity, even in total darkness, proves the depth of the despair can't be solved by just cutting the Wi-Fi.
You can't. The regime uses the blackout to control the information highway, providing cover for their actions. But on the ground, they need an equally brutal, fast, and mobile method to control the physical streets and enforce that zero-tolerance mandate.
Which leads us directly to this dual battle. The terrifying ground tactics versus the digital counter-resistance. The sources make it so clear that the Iranian regime's method of rapid street control is horrifically effective and also terrifyingly simple. It's the deployment of these motorbike squads.
Yes, this is the analogy for machine-like repression that we really need to focus on. These mobile forces are the physical enforcement arm of the crackdown, and they're primarily composed of the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and the Ba'athist militias.
Can you differentiate their roles for us?
Sure. The IRGC is the elite professional military force. They're directing the strategic repression from behind the scenes. The Ba'athist, on the other hand, are the massive volunteer paramilitary forces.
And they're the ones on the front lines.
They are the front line. They're often younger, often fanatically loyal to the regime, and they're deployed for that first-line crowd control and, frankly, for terror tactics. They're seen as disposable, they're fast, and they're highly effective at dispersing large crowds.
Describe the specific method of attack. What is the psychological impact on the protesters?
The tactic is designed for both physical lethality and maximum psychological terror. The Basij militias ride fast, often in groups of 2 or 3 per bike, and they ride directly into dense protest crowds, and they immediately begin firing indiscriminately.
Using the metal pellets and firearms we talked about.
Yes. The goal is total fragmentation of the crowd. Their speed and their mobility ensure that demonstrations are shattered before they can fully organize or gain critical mass. The outcome is always the same. Every protest faced with this tactic ends in bloodshed and chaos.
And the eyewitness accounts, they paint a visceral picture of pure terror that goes beyond just dispersal.
They do. The sources reference scenes of extreme terror, protesters being forced to flee through narrow alleyways, and this horrifying image of bullets tearing through neighborhoods, not just hitting protesters, but terrifying entire civilian blocks, leaving families trapped inside their own homes.
So it's a form of highly mobile, localized state terror.
That's exactly what it is. It's a reliance on fear, speed, and unpredictable lethal force, all designed to keep citizens off balance and unwilling to gather again.
From an analytical perspective, what does the regime's reliance on this specific tactic tell us about their situation? Is it purely a sign of overwhelming strength, or does it hint at a deeper vulnerability?
That's a great question. It's a sign of both strength and profound vulnerability.
How so?
The strength lies in their undisputed control over physical enforcement, their willingness to deploy it without any restraint, and the sheer number of armed Basij militias they can mobilize at a moment's notice. They are not afraid of using lethal force openly on their own people.
So where's the vulnerability then?
The vulnerability is exposed because the violence is so extreme and so visible that it can't be sustained indefinitely without a massive internal backlash or some kind of external consequence. Relying on motorbike squads firing indiscriminately means the repression isn't surgically precise. It's brutal and it's messy. It creates more martyrs and it increases public outrage.
And crucially, the experts cited in the source material argue that there's no local counter to this.
None. There is no local counter. Protesters can't simply outmaneuver units that are designed for speed and lethal force, especially when those forces are armed with live ammunition. You can't match their fire superiority or their mobility when you're on foot.
Which leads to the critical point the sources raise, the absolute need for external pressure to combat this ground tactic.
Yes. The argument is that the international community has to move beyond mere condemnation, beyond strongly worded statements, unless external pressure manages to actually degrade the IRGC and Basij operational capabilities.
How would they do that?
Perhaps through targeted sanctions against specific commanders, specific arms shipments that supply them with ammunition, or other operational restrictions. Targeted actions are seen as the only measure that could potentially prevent further bloodshed and give protesters a fighting chance to organize safely, without the imminent threat of motorbike squads executing people in the streets.
It's an urgent policy consideration.
Very.
Okay, so now let's look up. While the streets are being controlled by gasoline engines and bullets, the resistance is taking place in the stratosphere. The key here is Starlink. SpaceX's satellite internet service, which has emerged as this crucial digital lifeline.
A lifeline for the silence. It's an attempt to bypass that digital straitjacket we've been talking about.
So how does it work? What's the technological advantage?
Starlink is the perfect technological answer to the state's digital control. Its primary advantage is its use of low Earth orbit satellites, LEO satellites. This is vital.
Why is that so different from traditional satellite internet?
Traditional satellites used for communication, they're called GEO, geostationary Earth orbit satellites. They're thousands of miles away, and they rely on these massive centralized ground stations, which a government can easily control or just shut down.
But Starlink is different.
The Starlink LEO satellites orbit much, much closer to Earth, often only a few hundred miles up, and they communicate directly with a small user terminal, something the size of a pizza box.
So it bypasses all the state-controlled infrastructure on the ground.
It completely bypasses the state-controlled ground networks, the local fiber optic lines, the ISPs, all the choke points the government uses to enforce the blackout, and the DPI. A Starlink terminal essentially functions like a cell tower in space, beaming uncensored internet directly to the user, regardless of what the Iranian Ministry of Information is trying to do on the ground.
So how was it deployed, and what was the immediate impact amid all this chaos?
Well, amid the escalating violence and the nationwide blackout, Elon Musk announced the free activation of Starlink in Iran. That was around January 9th, 2026.
And the terminals themselves.
The terminals were being smuggled in via the black market. They were reportedly in use by tens of thousands of individuals, with some estimates reaching as high as 100,000 units in circulation across the country. This deployment became the lifeblood of the information flow during that total communications shutdown.
So this is how the outside world started getting verifiable information and footage, despite the most severe blackout in years.
Precisely. Much of the leaked footage, the specific casualty reports, the real-time protest updates, including these incredible videos of citizens gathering at night and chanting chillingly, "Death to the dictator," in major cities like Tehran and Isfahan, all of that flowed out through Starlink connections.
It became the digital megaphone for the silenced.
That's what one source called it. It allowed human rights activists to provide critical, real-time reporting on the rising death tolls when all local infrastructure had been zeroed out.
But the regime is not passive in this. They immediately engaged in a high-stakes digital cat-and-mouse game to try and neutralize this threat from space.
The countermeasures were swift, they were sophisticated, and they were deployed at a national level. The authorities immediately deployed military-grade electronic warfare to jam the Starlink satellite signals.
How does that work? Is it easy to jam a satellite signal?
Jamming signals from LEO satellites is far more complex than jamming traditional radio or TV signals. It requires advanced, mobile military assets that can generate these high-power frequency bursts, targeting specific regions where the satellites are passing over.
And how effective was this military-grade jamming?
Unfortunately, it was highly effective. This jamming achieved up to 90% disruption nationwide. They particularly targeted the dense urban protest hotspots, where activists would be most likely to gather and try to use the terminals.
So even Starlink isn't a silver bullet.
No. While it's technically capable of surviving localized jamming, a coordinated national military electronic warfare campaign severely limited connectivity, making it sporadic and unreliable for mass communication.
And for the individual users, the ones who successfully smuggle and operated a terminal, the personal risk is extreme.
It is life or death. The security forces are highly trained and motivated to find these terminals. They conduct raids, they conduct seizures, and the simple possession or use of Starlink carries severe legal penalties. It's often framed as communication with foreign enemies.
Which could mean treason charges.
It could mean imprisonment or even the death penalty for anti-regime activities. The political weight of possessing this counter-technology is immense, which makes it inaccessible to the vast majority of citizens due to both the risk and the cost.
So while Starlink is this technological marvel and a beacon of resistance, its impact is functionally limited by this aggressive state response and the immense personal risk involved.
Yes. Despite the massive effort, the hope it provided, and the crucial information it allowed to leak out, its overall reach remained small. The technical and logistical challenges, the cost, the smuggling risks, and the heavy military jamming it resulted in an overall 98.5% drop in network access for the vast majority of the population.
98.5%.
According to NetBlocks and Cloudflare data, it's a lifeline, but one available only to a determined and highly vulnerable fraction of the citizenry, fighting a losing battle against massive state infrastructure control.
And this struggle, it really highlights the core lesson here, which ties the digital and the physical conflicts together.
Absolutely. The broader significance is that the struggle in Iran is a stark reminder that control over the digital realm, the ability to provide or suppress information, to impose digital darkness, is now recognized by authoritarian states as being as potent and as necessary for repression as control over the streets themselves.
You have to suppress the news of the violence in order to continue the violence.
That is the 21st century face of state terror.
So this deep dive into the Iranian uprising, it reveals a society that's just caught in this relentlessly escalating cycle of violence and information control. We've synthesized the crucial details for you, the listener, and confirmed that the root of this crisis is that profound economic despair,
Symbolized by the real's catastrophic collapse.
coupled with decades of unyielding social and political repression.
And we've analyzed how this conflict is defined by intentional information control. The government uses that digital straitjacket, the blackouts, to conceal the human cost, to create this contested death toll that ranges from verified minimums of 490 up to opposition claims exceeding 3,000.
And at the same time, they use the analog brutality and speed of the IRGC and besieged motorbike squads to terrorize the physical streets and enforce their zero-tolerance mandate.
But the resilience of the citizens, their determination to continue protesting across all 31 provinces, despite the blackouts, despite the mass arrests, and despite the imminent risk of lethal force, that's the central, enduring narrative here.
And technology like Starlink provides that crucial, albeit compromised and high-risk lifeline that keeps the world informed of the atrocities being committed in the dark.
The lesson for the learner in all of this is that you are witnessing a reflection of a society at its absolute breaking point, a point where the unyielding state machinery is being challenged by a restless, determined populace that feels it has nothing left to lose. The state is relying on machine-like repression and calculated darkness to survive and to hide the scale of its lethal response.
And that brings us to the final provocative thought, the one that emerges directly from the source material and the sheer severity of these tactics. In the face of tactics designed specifically to hide mass killings, this combination of zero-tolerance mandates, military-grade jamming, and highly mobile terror units, what is the immediate operational responsibility of the international community?
It's a critical question. The sources really raise the issue of whether the world will move beyond simple condemnation to targeted action. Specifically, how will external pressures, such as targeted sanctions designed to immediately degrade the IRGC and besieged militias' operational capabilities?
Making it physically harder for them to deploy or to get ammunition?
Exactly. Or, on the other side, the sustained expansion and protection of digital tools like Starlink. How will those things shift the critical balance? This is a struggle between organized repression and the right to information and survival. And that urgent choice, the choice between just words and targeted, meaningful action, it sits at the forefront of global policy right now. And it's a choice that will determine whether these massive civilian death tolls will continue to rise in the intentional darkness.